For those of you who speak both languages, you can just stay in the main room. Welcome to our fifth dialogue this year about just transitions, sustainable transitions by the Transnational Center for Just Energy, Climate, and Sustainability Transitions, TRAJECT, together with POLEN Just Transitions. This event occurs within the first environmental studies framework with the IDEA, located in Bogota, in the National University of Colombia, commemorating the 35 years of interdisciplinary work in environmental studies, promoting critical thinking and territorial action. This event, organized by IDEAS, starting today on November 12th until November 15th in the Margarita González Auditorium, will be held at this venue, and TRAJECT will also be participating at this event on Thursday with a panel about the interdisciplinarity and community participation towards sustainability and climate justice, focuses from education, environment, and early warning systems with the participation of three of our beneficiaries. Those of you who would like to participate and who are located here in Bogota are welcome to participate in this event, discussing the different strategies of social dialogue that have been implemented in other countries. Today, we have a panel of experts and our moderator, Lorena López, in this dialogue that we will have today on this topic, reflecting on it from Colombia, Chile, and Germany. My name is Grace Quiseno. I am the academic coordinator of TRAJECT and the European Hub, and also the POLEN Transiciones Justas coordinator. And I have the pleasure of introducing you to my colleague, my friend, and moderator of this dialogue, Lorena López. She is an environmental and sanitary engineer of Magdalena University. She is currently finalizing her master's in environment and development at the Institute of Environmental Studies. She is the co-founder of POLEN, beneficiary of TRAJECT at a master's level, and currently she is undergoing research at the Dominican Republic. I would like to thank Lorena and POLEN Just Transitions on behalf of TRAJECT for having participated on the call that we put out to have these dialogues. And I would also like to remind you that next Tuesday, November 19th, we will be finalizing our dialogues for this year with the dialogue called Exploring Access and Accessibility of Electricity in the Times of Energy Transitions, that will be organized by the South Africa Hub. These events can also be found on our YouTube channel. I will now hand it over to Lorena, who will be moderating this event. Thank you, Grace. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here with us. It is really a pleasure to be able to share this dialogue with you. As Grace mentioned, my name is Lorena López, and I am delighted to be able to share with you today. Thank you, TRAJECT, as well, for helping us hold this event. As Grace mentioned, I am a beneficiary in the framework of the Masters for the Development of Environmental Studies of the Universidad Nacional de Colombia, based in Bogota. And currently, I am undergoing a junior research at a university in Dominican Republic, working together with communities and different key actors within the framework of the just energy transition. And within that framework, we are gathered here today virtually from different places of the world. We have people from Chile, Germany, Colombia, and we are also not leaving out all the other places that will also be present here, who will be joining us, and we highly encourage everyone to participate via comments, through the chat, through YouTube, or on Zoom for those of us who are here. We truly would like to take advantage of this opportunity as much as possible. And of course, we would like to take advantage of the input and contribution of all the guests that we have here with us. We also consider that within the framework of just energy transitions, there are many different scenarios. Closing down of different mines, different electricity, power plants, and a series of different dynamics in different communities that have to do with this system. And all these pathways end up directly or indirectly affecting or impacting the lives of different actors, workers, public sector, communities, amongst others, that are all immersed in these dynamics. So it is worth it to ask ourselves, how can we guarantee that this is a just transition? So in that sense, not just considering a target of mitigation and adaptation in terms of climate change, but also considering the procedures that are necessary to be able to get to that target, how these also end up being a guarantee of all this. So this is what we will be dialoguing from. It's a dialogue that goes beyond this. And we really want to try to go back into the different contexts from a country like Colombia that is presenting certain dialogue initiatives. I like to refer to this about the dialogue about dialogue. A country like Chile, where some steps have been taken, but we'll see what learning experiences occur down the way. And a country like Germany, where we have also been able to move forward, but also with very specific conditions about funding, opportunities, capacities, installed capacities, and acquired capacities as well, that have also allowed there to be certain learning experiences. So we would like to think about how these steps can continue. So the intent of this dialogue being an exchange or a space that considers all these strategies, the methodologies, concepts, what we experience, and from a sector like workers. That's why we have our guests here. I will briefly introduce them in a second, but also with the intent of trying to see how we can bring the gender perspective into all of this. And Marius will also share a very interesting research process that has occurred. So it is a pleasure for me to present from Colombia. We have Mr. Otto Gómez, who is the Secretariat of Mining and Energy Affairs in SINTRAELECOL. He is from the Guajira, the Northern Caribbean region of Colombia. He joined Corelca in 1987 as an assistant operator, and since then he has been part of SINTRAELECOL, where he has been performing roles as National Director, Secretariat of Energy Affairs, and currently he is a union leader, a social union leader in different sectors in the Department of Guajira and in the Atlantic coast of Colombia. And additionally, he is also a professor of languages from the University of La Guajira. He has taken different certificate programs as well, and he is a lawyer from the Simón Bolívar University in Barranquilla in Colombia. So please, Mr. Otto, greet all these guests that we have here. And we will continue introducing our speakers. Good morning. Can you hear me? Yes, loud and clear. Well, good morning, Lorena. Once again, thank you so much for your invitation. Thank you for considering not just SINTRAELECOL, but also the workers in Colombia.
Buen día para
Good
Alejandro.
morning,
Buenas
Marius,
tardes,
Alejandro. Good
Alejandro.
afternoon for
Buen
Marius.
día para Alejandro. Un
Good
gusto
morning,
escucharte
Alejandro.
nuevamente.
It's a pleasure to hear
Pero
you
aquí
once
estamos
again.
a la expectativa.
And here we are,
Eh,
ready to develop this session.
Bastante interesado en
We're very
seguir
interested
explorando lo
in
energético.
exploring the
Y bueno,
mining and energy
suerte para
sectors,
todos. Un abrazo.
and
Gracias, señor
we
Otto,
hope to have a
igualmente. También nos
fruitful session.
acompaña en este
Thank you
espacio
very
Alejandro
much. We also
Ochoa,
have
quien es
Alejandro
consejero
Ochoa with
nacional,
us,
secretario de Medio
who is
Ambiente,
a
Ciencia
national
Justa en
advisor
la
and
CUT
secretary
de
of the
Chile,
Environment and Just Transition in
vivienda en
Chile.
Mendoza,
And he was
Argentina,
born in
en
Mendoza,
el
Argentina.
91 por allá
In
viajó a Chile
1991,
y desde
he
entonces ha
traveled to
estado en
Chile
ese país
and he has
y
been at that
no habla
country
nada
ever
argentino,
since. He
habla
does
muy
not
chileno.
speak like an Argentinian. He speaks
Pero bueno,
like
sus
a true
orígenes en el
person from Chile.
sindicalismo
And
fueron
his
aproximadamente desde el año
beginning in
97,
the
que
union
tuvo la
movement began
oportunidad
a
de
long time ago.
trabajar
And in 2007, he had the
en la
chance
ENAP,
to work
y
at
allí
the
pues resultó dirigente
ENAP for its
general de
acronym in
base
Spanish,
de la
and he
Federación de
was a
Trabajadores
base union
Exportativos de
leader.
FETRACON. Hasta hoy
He
pues
was part of
ha llevado el
FETRACON,
cargo de
and
secretario.
he has been the
También
secretariat
fue
ever
presidente de la CUT
since. And he
Valparaíso
was also the
y
president of the CUT
desde
in
2021 pues
Valparaíso.
se viene
And since
desempeñando como consejero
2021, he has
nacional
been
de la
performing
CUT, creando y
as a
encabezando la
national
Secretaría de
advisor of the
Medio Ambiente y
CUT at the
Transición
head
Justa.
of the Environment
De
and Just
profesión de base
Transition
es
Secretariat.
técnico profesional
He
eléctrico.
is a
Tiene también
professional
diplomado en
technical
relaciones laborales
electrician.
y otro en
He has
defensa de
different certificate
constitucionalidad
programs
de la Universidad Alberto Hurtado.
from the
Hola
Alberto
Alejandro,
Hurtado
gracias por
University.
estar
Hello,
aquí.
Alejandro. Thank you for being here with us.
Muchas gracias, Lorena, por la
Thank you,
invitación,
Lorena,
por
for
la
your
presentación,
invitation, for
muy,
your
muy
introduction,
emocionante, muy
which is
agradecido.
very
Saludar
exciting. I'm very
a
grateful,
Otto
and I would like
y a
to greet
Marius.
Otto and
Un placer y un
Marius.
honor estar
It
con
is a
ellos
pleasure and an honor to
acompañándolos en
be here
este
with
panel,
them,
del cual seguro voy
sharing
a
this
aprender
panel that I
de la
will very
disertación
likely
prologada.
learn from.
Así que desde ya, bueno, un saludo grande
So,
de este
thank you
último lugar
very
del mundo,
much,
como dice
and
algunas
greetings
canciones,
from this,
y
the
con
last
mucha
place on earth, like
solidaridad
many songs
con
say,
mucho
with a
cariño
lot of
a la gente que nos
solidarity and
está
a lot of
escuchando.
warmth and care for all who are
Gracias
listening to us.
Alejandro.
Thank you,
Y bueno, por
Alejandro.
último, pero no menos importante, el
Finally, but
invitado
not
Marius
last but
Copete.
not least,
Marius,
Marius
ahí me
Koepchen.
indicarás la manera
Marius, I'm
correcta de
sorry if
pronunciar
I'm
tu
not
apellido.
pronouncing your name correctly.
Marius completó su máster
Marius
en la Universidad
has a
para el
master's
Desarrollo
degree
Sostenible
from the
de
University for
Everthal
Sustainable Development of
en el
Ebertha
programa de estudios de
in
gestión del
the
cambio global y
Global
colaboró
Change
también con la
Management Studies
ONG
program, and he also worked with
Gender
the
City Women
NGO
for Climate Justice.
Genders Women for Climate
Para su
Justice
tesis de máster
for his
for
master's thesis.
developing an analysis of climate protection programs from the perspective of critical masculinities and research.
He
Desde
had
el
a
año
very
2021
comprehensive
viene
approach.
trabajando
From
en la Universidad
2021,
Europea de Flensburg
he has been working
como
at a European
asistente de
university as
investigación,
a research
estudiando la
assistant,
transformación de los sistemas
studying the
energéticos
transformation of
desde
energy
la
systems
perspectiva de la
from the
investigación
perspective of
feminista, ¿no? Su
feminist
investigación se
research.
centra
His research
principalmente
is
en el nexo
focused mainly
cuidado y
on the
energía,
nexus of care
en las
and
transiciones
energy
locales.
and
Entonces,
local
la
transitions.
transversalización
So,
precisamente de
how
estos
that
dos
can
elementos
be
claves,
cross-cutting, these two
y
key
asimismo
elements.
también imparte el
And
curso
also,
Política de
he
Transición Justa en
is
el
in
programa
charge of
de
the
estudios
policies
energías
of just
sostenibles.
transitions
Entonces, pues
course
verdaderamente
in
un gusto
sustainable
tu
energies.
participación en
So
este
it is a
espacio,
pleasure to
Marius.
have your
Buenas
participation in
tardes.
this space, Marius. Good morning.
Yes, hello, and thank you for inviting me. I feel very honored to be in this panel, and I hope we can all learn a bit about justice and energy. Looking forward to it. Thank you for inviting me.
Gracias a ti, Marius, también por
Thank you,
acompañarnos.
Marius, as well, for
Además,
joining
también
us.
agradecerte a
And
todas
I
las
would also
personas
like to
que ya
thank
se encuentran
everyone
conectadas
who is here with
aquí
us.
con nosotros en este espacio. Y bueno, entrando en materia,
And
señor Otto, cuénteme.
without further ado,
Aquí un poco en la
Otto,
introducción veíamos como, bueno, es
during
que
the
hay un
introduction, we could
contexto
see
en el
that there
marco de la
is a
transición
context
energética
within the
justa en
framework
donde
of
hay una
just
serie
energy
de
transition, where there's a
actores
series of
diversos,
actors, different actors,
comunidades,
communities,
trabajadores, sector público
workers,
y
public
nuestra.
sector that
Pero
are
hay
all
un elemento
immersed in this. But there
allí
is an
súper
element
importante que empieza
that is very important, that starts to become relevant, which is social dialogue. What are those elements and why should social dialogue be so important when thinking about this matter? Well, good morning once again. I have to start by saying that at the beginning of the 90s, the state monopoly of energy, of the generation, transmission, trade, and distribution of energy in Colombia completely changed. To this day, 85% of the electricity sector in Colombia is completely private, and only 15 or 30% belongs to the state. Very small companies, just like at the beginning. Now, in energy transition, starting from Law 1715 of 2014 and Law 2099 of 2021 on conventional sources and energy transition, Colombia intended to look for new energy matrices and started looking at the northern part of Guajira, which is characterized because it does not have a constant breeze coming in from the northern eastern part, which is ideal for eolic electricity, and it has permanent heat sources from the sun. But those projects going into social matters are delayed more than 6 years because the dialogue with ethnic communities, with the Waju indigenous peoples, has been completely difficult. The prior consultations, the emblematic and ancestral places, their permanence in these areas, the influence of tourism, the lack of possibilities of access, permanent hunger in these communities have all been factors that are determinant for those projects not being able to be fully developed. These are just a few elements that are part of the transition towards clean energies. The permanence of communities around these central areas is another social situation. In the Colombian state, there are two emblematic thermal central stations. One of them is in Paipa, a coal station that are completely obsolete. But around them, there are many different social sectors that live off that small-scale mining activity. And these are the ones that provide coal to that state central station. And we have Termo Guajira in the northern part of Colombia, next to the Caribbean Ocean, in a municipality called Dibuya, where I have worked for 38 years as main operator, where the communities that live around that area are small artisanal fishermen, peasants, and around the population, there are different merchants. And these two power plants are key in the social context, both in Boyacá and Paipa, as well in Dibuya-Mingueo in the Guajira region. The open dialogue about a transition of those plants towards zero carbon has not been finalized. And it has not started out very well because, like I said, transition to clean energies of the projects in the northern part of Guajira was supposed to start 6 years ago and hasn't because of different issues. Cooperative, social problems that I already mentioned, amongst others. As workers, we have always worried about the future of those social sectors. I'm referring to social sectors that are located around the state thermal power plants. There are some power plants that have been around for more than 50 years, which are called Hermosipa in Cundinamarca, Zipaquirá, where the famous Salt Cathedral lies, that are also powered by small miners in that region. But the SIPAs, Hermosipa 1, 2, 3, and 4, belong to an Italian multinational company called Enel. It has been very difficult to establish a social program, but Colombia has a considerable delay with the implementation of the new energy matrices. And in this crisis that began in March and April, the water crisis, that keeps water plants under very controlled generation because of the water shortage, especially in a capital such as Bogota, has really negatively affected the system in Colombia. And these central systems have been the ones responsible for generation of electricity in our company, like Sipa, Paipa, Termoguajira, Tasajero, and other power plants, the older power plants of Corelca and Termobarranquilla. There are other power plants that have really also helped, like the new ones in Celca, in the southern part of Córdoba, Catre Sur 1 and Catre 2, but the older ones, like we say, have been the ones that have really put in the technical and operational muscle and the workers of those plants. That is the general scenario today, and we're really worried about social sectors such as Domingueo and Dibuya, and what happens to them when the plants make that change from coal to clean, non-conventional energies, because that population mainly lives and they have had certain peace of mind in the last 42 years in that region, which was a region that was very violent and affected by all sorts of illegal sectors.
And so we are also expecting to reach these additional sectors. That's all for the moment. Thank you very much. Thank you, Otto. But please don't say goodbye yet, because we will have questions for you to go more into depth on all these matters. And please stay around for a round of questions and comments that we will have at the end. But with all this context, this whole panorama that you've helped us to understand, well, we have to break this all down into parts. We have these concerns that you mentioned. You spoke about a key element that really draws my attention, and that's the issue of employees. This whole series of people who perform different functions. And of course, they are completely immersed in the whole context of a just energy transition. I'm also concerned about dialogues, because I understand these have not been had with communities or with employees. So we could perhaps discuss this a little more. What are these elements that should already be, let's say, not necessarily actively being promoted, but should be discussed, to have different spaces for discussion, to reach different points of consensus and agreements? And in doing so, create an action plan. It should be joint work. What are the elements that should be prioritized to mitigate the uncertainty that we have from the perspective of employees?
Bueno, lo laboral es caso aparte, ¿no? Es caso aparte. Vuelvo al tema de las privatizaciones.
Workers, that's a separate issue. Let me go back to the law from 1992. Many sources of work were lost, and that led to much outsourcing in Colombia. Now we can say, if we want to understand a current employment issue, we could say that when it comes to all of the workers on the payroll of these companies, we do have social security, that we also receive support for our children to study, that we have health coverage. But those of us who work under this model are the minority compared to the outsourced workers. We're talking about around 8,000 affiliates, but then there are some 30,000 outsourced employees. And that started to grow after those aforementioned laws were introduced. And this is not only the mining and energy sector, but in almost all commercial and industrial companies. I will not name those companies now. Let's talk about the electricity sector. With the arrival of new energy grids, for example, photovoltaic energy sources and wind energy, we require specialized manpower. And in those power plants that I've already named, we don't know what to do. First, we have the issue of our age, where in the majority of cases, we are over the age of 45. Our technical and operational knowledge is related to the plants that we work at. So, in the case of my colleagues from Tocancipá, they know how to operate the thermal energy plants. The same applies for Paipa or for the Guajira plants. Given our career trajectories, our age, etc., we do not see ourselves involved in the participation, operation, maintenance, and commissioning of these new plants when it comes to these photovoltaic and wind energy plants. The number of operators and mechanics, technical experts in thermal energy plants will of course not be the same number of operators needed for the new energy grids. There are too many of us. Many of us will not be needed. Those of us who are over the age of 45 are concerned. But also those who are younger than 45 and have just arrived, well, what will be of them? A technical worker in Colombia after the age of 35 is already considered old. You know that, Lorena. That is what is enshrined in our employment legislation. And it's much easier for someone who's 21 or 22 to enter the workforce under completely different conditions. And they will also have, or in our case rather, those of us who've been on the scene for a while have a new, or a different rather, set of skills that will not be able to be adapted to the new energy matrix and new sources of energy. This is of concern to us. The Ministry of Labor and other associated entities that are working with employment matters and in the business sector in Colombia need to sit down at the table together to see what our future will look like. We don't have clarity on this today.
y más del
photovoltaic
80%
and
de los
wind
trabajadores
electricity
informales
sources, and the
somos
majority
técnicos,
of
mecánicos y
employees
operarios
who are
calificados de las centrales térmicas
qualified
en Colombia no tenemos ni idea
operators,
ni sabemos qué va a
mechanics,
pasar con
and
nosotros
technical experts
a
are
futuro,
very
ni
unclear on what will
conocemos
happen
la operación y el
to us in the
mantenimiento
future, nor are we
de los
familiar with the
actuales
operation and maintenance of
STD.
these new energy
Así están las
grids.
cosas en lo laboral.
That's how things stand right now.
Entonces, en este
Okay,
sentido, todos
so
estos
in
son
that sense,
elementos
all of
que
these are
deberían
elements
hoy estar en la mesa
that should already be
de
being
diálogo y que
discussed
deberían estar
at the dialogue
tratándose, y
table.
todas estas incertidumbres
This
son las
should
que
be
hoy en
dealt
día
with,
dan como el punto de partida sobre el, bueno,
and that's the
si se va a
starting
sacar
point to
esto
be able to
adelante,
say,
hablemos
look, if we're
también
going
de
to go
esta
ahead with
otra
this,
situación
let's
en el
also talk
marco
about
pues,
other
de la
matters.
justicia, de la transición energética justa, desde la perspectiva de lo
We
laboral,
need to look at this
del
from a labor
trabajador.
perspective.
Entonces, valioso que hoy traigamos en este espacio también el
So that's
sacar, el
something that we
presentar
can
como
discuss
esas
today.
ideas así tan claves e ir teniéndolas presentes.
We need to be
Gracias,
very aware of
Alejandro.
this.
Entonces,
Okay,
este
Otto.
panorama, ahora quisiera
So
un poco acercarme a Chile.
I would now like to move to
Con
Chile.
la participación también de Alejandro en este espacio. Y un poco, Alejandro, por
And hear
entrar
from
en el
Alejandro.
contexto de Chile,
In the
entendería que
context of
aproximadamente en el
Chile, I
2019 se
understand that it was
anuncia
around
un programa
2019.
de descarbonización en
You're talking about
donde se
decarbonization,
comprometen a salir de la matriz eléctrica, todas las termoeléctricas a 2040. Y a
and
partir
you
de
are
allí, pues
doing a
bueno,
transition up to
se hace también incluso desde
2040.
organizaciones de la sociedad civil, se impulsan
And the
coaliciones,
idea is to
por ahí
build
mencionaban el bono
coalitions
carbón, donde
from,
hay
for example,
unidades,
civil society in
trabajadores,
different
organizaciones de la sociedad
coal
civil,
organizations and other
e incluso se llega a
CSOs.
demostrar que las termoeléctricas podrían salir
And
un poco antes,
thermoelectric plants
pero
may in
el
fact be
asunto
in
también
operation
aquí a revisar es
before
el
that
cómo
date.
se
But
hacen
here
las
it's about
cosas,
looking at how
porque con
things will
Alejandro
be
pues
done.
comparto,
Because with
vengo dialogando
Alejandro,
el tema desde hace un buen tiempo,
we've been
y
talking
Alejandro
about this
dice,
for
es que
some time
Chile
now, and
algunas veces
Alejandro
tiende a
says,
ser como
look,
un
Chile
ejemplo a
is also
seguir, ¿no? O sea, hay
sometimes
cosas
considered a
también
role
que
model, something
reflexionar
to
y
be
hay
followed, but we
aprendizajes
have to
que vale la
really
pena
look at
retomar.
this. And there are
Entonces, pues para
lessons
Colombia,
learned.
que es un país donde apenas se están dando unas
So in
iniciativas,
Colombia, we are just starting to
tener
see some
también la
initiatives.
experiencia de Chile
It's also
este
about
espacio
looking at
es
Chile's
valioso
experience.
por ver
That's
como,
very
bueno, el
valuable
camino que ya ustedes han tenido de algún modo la oportunidad de recorrer
because you have had some
en este
opportunities to course
marco de la
correct in your
transición
model.
energética justa. ¿Cuáles son esos elementos,
What are
especialmente del
these
diálogo
elements?
social, que se han tenido en cuenta o que no se han tenido en cuenta y que valdría la
What has
pena
been taken into account? What has not
considerarlos
been taken into account? And what would
para
be worth us looking
dinamizar
at?
precisamente estos espacios, Alejandro?
So, Alejandro.
Gracias, Lorena. Bueno, primero, muy interesante lo que cuenta el compañero Otto de
Thank
Colombia
you, Lorena. And
de
I'd just like
verdad
to start by
que
saying that what Otto, a
Chile
colleague
no
from
está
Colombia,
muy
has
lejos
shared
de muchas
is
de las
extremely interesting.
cosas
And
que
Chile
vemos,
is no stranger
de
to
las
many of these
dificultades, de los
issues,
desafíos
many
que
of
tiene
these
Colombia.
challenges
Como
that
tú lo
Chile
decías
is
en un
facing,
principio,
that Colombia is facing.
Chile, yo lo he dicho no me pongo colorado en decirlo, ha exportado
I'm not embarrassed to say here
una política
that
de hipocresía y
I think we
de
have exported a
invisibilidad, ¿ya?
hypocritical
Yo lo dije
legislation.
en los
We
live en la
have
Semana de la Energía que participé en
made
Paraguay.
these
Lo dije
individuals
bien claro, Chile
invisible.
es una
I said
casa que
this
los empresarios
clearly
y los gobiernos
in a
la
meeting in
pintan
Paraguay
bonita por
recently.
fuera, pero
Business people
adentro
and
revesan no ven el
politicians
techo
make it sound as if
y
it's
los
all
trabajadores y el
roses in
pueblo les
Chile,
quedó
but
viendo a la
our
intemperie.
people
Por lo tanto,
and our
quizás
workers
hay
are
algunos
left
matices
exposed
que
to
sí
the
se pueden
elements.
copiar de lo que ha hecho Chile, pero en gran
And so
mayoría
there are things that could be
Chile
looked at from the
está
Chilean
tratando de
example,
hacer
but in many
aplicar una política
cases,
europea de transición justa,
Chile is
pero
trying to
sin plata.
apply a
Y
European
aparte,
energy transition
sin
model,
ser
but without
abrazada
money
por,
and
por leyes o
without
por
having
una apariencia de
protection
protección social, ¿no?
or
Chile
proper
tiene una
social
desprotección
protection.
social,
In fact, you could say we have
un sector
inexistent
energético
or
muy
deprotection in the
privatizado. El
social
Estado
area.
es un ente, digamos que casi inexistente en el sistema eléctrico, tanto
You
en la
could say that
distribución, en la
we have a
transmisión
lack
y también en la
of
generación.
provisions in our
Y las
legislation
veces
for
que ha habido
transmission as well as
impulsos a que el
generation.
Estado
And
pero la
when
industria entre, por lo menos en generación,
the state has
el
tried to enter there,
mercado privado lo ha
the private
evitado,
market
¿no? Y
has
esto es debido a la
created
Constitución,
obstacles there.
a ciertas bases de la Constitución del 80 que nos regula, que
And
fue hecha
here
en dictadura, ¿no? Y es un
we
poco lo
have our
que
constitution that was
planteábamos,
created under the dictatorship that makes
las
some reference to
transiciones
this.
justas o el
But
diálogo
when it
social
comes to
no
the
tiene
social
sentido.
dialogue or
Nosotros el
just
diálogo
transition,
social se viene hablando
it doesn't
desde el
really make
2012,
sense.
2013,
We've
se
been talking
implementó
about
fuerte
this
por
since
allá por el
2012,
2016
2013,
en
and
Chile,
more strongly since
pero en el
2013.
fondo no sirve de nada el diálogo
But
cuando no nos escuchan a los
it doesn't
trabajadores.
do anything when
Hoy día mismo, por
we are
ejemplo,
not heard.
en la OLADE, que
In
es
Olade,
la agencia, ¿no es cierto?, internacional que se va a dedicar a las políticas públicas de la energía en Latinoamérica
looking at
y
our
el Caribe,
public policy
no
for
estaba la
energy in Latin
presencia de los
America and the
trabajadores,
Caribbean,
estaban los
you can
expertos,
see
los
that
gobiernos,
workers
las
are absent from
empresas, y
this.
los
Experts,
trabajadores no
companies,
estaban.
and government are always
Nosotros tuvimos
mentioned,
presencia desde las tribunas, pero hicimos ver que
but
la
we have
palabra
only
nuestra de
really
los
had
trabajadores es
a
importante,
presence
no
via our
solamente en Chile, en
unions.
Latinoamérica y en el
But
mundo.
our word
Y
is not
así lo
taken
demuestran los
seriously, not only in
países
Chile, but in
desarrollados.
the region and the rest of the world.
Entonces, haciendo esa diferencia, el diálogo social es fundamental para una
So,
simple cosa,
of
la paz.
course, social
Pero
dialogue
uno
is
ve
always
hoy
necessary
día
to
más que
ensure
todo lo que está
peace.
pasando, ¿no es cierto? El genocidio en Palestina, la
We
guerra
have issues, of course. We
de
have
Ucrania
genocide in Palestine.
Rusia,
We have
una
a war
falta de
between
diálogo
Ukraine and
que
Russia.
es algo fundamental
And the
para no
lack
ser
of dialogue
para el
there
desarrollo
has
de ellos.
led
Nosotros somos el
to
mamífero
this
más
upheaval. This
exitoso
is
en el
fundamental
planeta
for
por
human
ser
beings.
sociables, por ser dialogantes, por
We
respetar nuestra raza.
can be successful
Entonces,
when we
en
have
ese
mutual
sentido creo que
respect
vamos perdiendo el
and
horizonte y me
social
parece
dialogue. But I think that
fundamental
we've lost sight
que
of
la
that.
transición justa nos lleva a eso. Y en Chile hemos implementado un sistema
And
que a
in
nosotros nos
Chile,
molesta porque se implementó
we
en el
have a
gobierno
system
pasado.
that
Por supuesto que
annoys
los
us a great
empresarios
deal.
aplauden un gobierno de derecha,
The
cuyo presidente,
last
bueno, ya
government, a
falleció,
right-wing
Sebastián
government
Piñera,
that was
pero
applauded by the business
sigue
sector, but
su legado.
the
Y nos
ex-president, the
preocupa
former
porque a
president, has
nosotros no nos
passed away, but his
preguntaron nada.
legacy is
Los
still with
trabajadores
us.
no participamos en las
As workers, we
políticas,
did not
por ejemplo, de la
participate in
agenda
these
de
policies, for
descarbonización.
example,
Recién
in the
este gobierno nos
decarbonization
incluyó
agenda. So the
y
government did not
tampoco
include us.
podría decirte que nos incluyeron, pero para la foto, porque no se tomó en cuenta nuestra opinión
They
en
just
el
want us
proceso.
there
Es
for
más,
the pretty
hace
photo, but they
poquito
don't take
hubo
us
una
into
declaración
account.
del presidente
Just a little
de la
while ago, there was a
de la
declaration
Organización de Sindicatos de Energía que
from the
dijo,
president
el
of the
proceso ha
energy
sido
unions who said
desordenado,
the process has
no nos han
been
tenido en cuenta y ha
disorganized, we
sido
have
a la
not been
pinta de
taken
los
into account,
empresarios. ¿Por qué
and
lo digo? Porque las
it has been
termoeléctricas que se
biased
han cerrado
towards the energy
han sido
sector.
termoeléctricas que
Thermal energy
terminaron
plants that have been
su historia
closed
de funcionamiento. O sea, era
came to
más
the
caro
end of their
mantenerlas
operations. So it was
funcionando que
more
detenerlas.
costly to keep them
Por lo
operating
tanto, no se han
than to stop
detenido
them
las
operating.
termoeléctricas por el proceso de descarbonización,
And so they have
sino
not
que se
been
han
taken
detenido
into account
por
for the
un proceso
decarbonization
de
process.
economía de
They've
las empresas. Y
basically
además de eso,
stopped operations
hay
due
ciertas
to the
unidades, como por ejemplo
economies
Ventana 2, que fue muy alabada
of
por
uh,
el presidente en
companies
la
here.
ONU, que la
There
iba
was
a
an
detener.
initiative
Ventana 1 y
that
Ventana 2 que han
was
afectado mucho
applauded
en esta
by the
zona, y yo vivo
UN
en
when
esta
the
zona de
president
frontera,
announced putting an end
han
to
afectado
Ventana 1
intoxicaciones
and
de niños en los
Ventana 2
colegios incluso.
operations.
Están afectando hasta hace meses atrás. Hoy día hay vientos, no hay tanto,
But
pero en marzo empezamos de nuevo. Y,
these
y lo que a
new
uno
wind
le molesta que al
operations
final el coordinador eléctrico
have had an
del
impact on
sistema
very basic daily
centralizado
operations,
que
for
Chile,
example, of
Chile tiene un
schools.
problema de geografía también,
Chile also has many
que es muy
geographical
importante tener
challenges.
en cuenta la geografía de los países en
You
este
have to, of
tema.
course, take into account the geographical
Resulta que
conditions
no se ha
of each
detenido esa
country.
línea. ¿Por qué? Por necesidad. No ha sido
But here,
suficiente el 30% de las renovables
30% renewable
para
energies have not been
dejar
sufficient
fuera del sistema a las termoeléctricas. Y
to
eso también
put a
se
stop to
asocia
operations
a
in all of
otra
our
cosa,
thermal energy plants. This
a
is
que
associated with another issue.
el sistema de transmisión y el sistema de
The
distribución
transmission system and the
se construyó
distribution
en Chile para
systems
las termoeléctricas,
were created for thermal
no para
energy
las
plants,
unidades de generación, perdón, de
not for
eólicas o solares.
wind energy or
Por lo
solar energy
tanto,
transmission.
no solamente en Chile se ha hablado mucho y se ha
So in
trabajado mucho en
Chile,
la generación,
we've worked a lot
pero no
on
se ha hablado
generation,
del
but we
problema
have
que
not
vamos a
spoken
tener en la
about
distribución y en
the
la
issue that we will
transmisión.
have with
Entonces,
distribution and transmission.
y vuelvo a repetir, en un
And let me
diálogo
go
de
back to
sordos,
this.
porque eso es el
And this is
diálogo
a
social
dialogue
en
amongst
Chile,
deaf
cuando
people.
cuando nos citan a la OIT, hablan los
When they sit down
gobiernos,
with the
hablan los empresarios, cuando
ILO,
vamos a hablar los
business
trabajadores,
people
uno mira
talk,
y no
the
hay
government
nadie
talks,
en
but
la sala,
when you go to
y hay
talk as a
solamente
worker, there's nobody else in the
algunos
room
funcionarios públicos de algunos
who
ministerios.
can
Entonces, el
actually
diálogo no es
reflect on
solamente
this.
sentarnos y
So
sacar una
dialogue
foto.
isn't just about sitting
El
down and
diálogo es
taking a
construir.
nice photo. It's about making a real
El diálogo
contribution.
social es trabajar en conjunto, es creer en el otro. El tema está que en
Social
Chile
dialogue
el
is about
poder
believing in the
empresarial,
other. The
y yo
thing
lo he
is that in
encarado
Chile,
en varios trabajos que
business
hacemos en
power,
teoría política
and
de
I've
los
seen
derechos
this
humanos en las empresas,
in many
es,
cases,
bueno, el empresario está dispuesto realmente a
business
cambiar,
people, are they truly willing to
porque uno lo
change?
ve, por ejemplo, en las salmoneras noruegas
For
acá en Chile.
example, the
En
Norwegian
Noruega
salmon
respetan los
operations
derechos
here in
humanos,
Chile.
respetan todo, y
In
acá en
Norway, they
Chile no
respect human
respetan
rights,
nada, ni la
etc. But here they don't
ecología,
respect
y además de
anything,
eso,
not even our
se
ecology.
transforman en mafias empresariales, tipo estilo de los 90. Entonces, en
And
realidad,
they
¿por
are
qué lo digo?
returning to
Porque
90s style
justamente me
operations.
preocupa que digan o que tomen a Chile como modelo,
So
porque el
I'm very
modelo de Chile
concerned
es no
that
preguntarle
Chile
a los
be taken
trabajadores,
as a model, because here we do not consult with
compartir con las
workers,
poblaciones. Las consultas públicas aquí no son
and public
vinculantes,
consultation
a pesar de
processes
haber
here are not
firmado el
binding,
Tratado de Escazú. Entonces,
despite the fact
por
that they
eso
were
yo
looked at
digo que
closely
es
in
una
the Kasu
política de
case.
hipocresía,
And that
aunque les
is why I
duela,
say
aunque
this
me
is
gustaría
a
y me gusta que les duela,
hypocritical
porque en el fondo, cuando
policy,
alguien logra que
even
consulten
if that
sobre
is
leyes es
hurtful.
para que tomen la atención. Y yo lo que sí
And
quisiera
what I do
dejar claro,
believe, and what I would like to be very clear on
porque
here,
te toman de negacionista cuando uno toma esta postura. Yo
is
tengo claro
that
por lo que pasó en Valencia, por lo
I
que
am
ha habido en el
clear,
planeta en
looking at what
general,
happened
sobre
in
todo nosotros en
Valencia in
Chile,
Spain recently and what has
que
happened
vivimos unos cambios de
around the planet
temperatura, que el
recently.
tema de la transición a energías más sanas, más renovables, es un tema que sí o sí,
I think that when
no
people
podemos
simply
negar
deny
a
these
nuestros trabajadores
realities,
a ese tema.
well,
Pero
that's
sí
not
hay
the way
una
to go.
cosa
We
que
cannot
tenemos que
deny the
tener clara,
realities of
que
our
es una
workers.
experiencia primero individual de cada país debido a la geografía,
Of
a su
course, each country
cultura,
is
a
unique
su
in terms of its
desarrollo.
culture, its geography,
Pero
its
también es
development.
importante que se tenga los
But
trabajadores en
here,
cuenta.
workers
Y
must also be
sobre
taken
todo
into account.
que el mercado no mande la transición justa a la bolsa, porque hoy día lo que uno está viendo, y lo vi yo en la OLADE, es que los
And I saw
bancos
this in the case of
centrales, los bancos
OLADE, central
mundiales, que son
banks,
los que
world
prestan
banks,
los dineros para que se produzcan estos proyectos, están
who work on
evaluando si
these
esto
projects,
realmente va a tener
are always evaluating
un reembolso, si
whether
va a
or
tener
not
una ganancia.
they will receive a return on this
Entonces uno se
investment.
pregunta, bueno, ¿qué interés
So you
tienen
ask yourself,
realmente por salvar el planeta?
what is their real interest in saving the
Y a
planet?
veces también es importante preguntarnos,
And sometimes it's also
vamos a
important.
hacer, nosotros no decimos que vamos a destruir el planeta, decimos vamos a hacerlo
What we
inhabitable
say
para el
is
ser
that
humano,
we have
pero
to
eso
avoid
nos
the
diferencia
inevitable
con
for
los
human beings,
ecologistas.
but that's
Pero sí
different to what
decimos
ecologists
también
say.
que primero tiene que estar el ser
But what we
humano,
say is that
saquemos al ser
first,
humano.
human
Y
beings have to do their part.
en países de Latinoamérica que tenemos
In
democracias
countries in
débiles
Latin America that have
y
weak
tenemos
democracies
lamentablemente precariedad laboral,
and that also
porque la mayoría de
experience
estas empresas
employment,
periodísticas
precarious
tienen
employment
el
conditions are
80% de
many.
los trabajadores
80% of all
tercerizados,
workers
subcontratados,
are
en
subcontracted.
donde cuando se
They're
cierra la
outsourced.
empresa primaria no se hace
So when the
responsable
primary
de sus
company
trabajadores.
is there closed down, they're not
Entonces,
responsible for
o
those
si no,
workers.
existe como en Chile está pasando, una reconversión populista en donde se los
In Chile,
capacita,
we are seeing a
pero son
populist
trabajadores que
reconversion where
tienen
people are
enfermedades de
being trained.
base debido a
But
la
we have
industria, por ejemplo,
many workers who
incontinencia,
have
presión
industrial
arterial
or work-based conditions,
grande,
for example. Many of
están
them
enfermos.
suffer from
¿Qué
hyperacusis,
empresario
which is an
de energía
auditory
renovable va a
syndrome, and
contratar a un
others.
trabajador que esté
But
enfermo?
is the
Por
renewable
más que yo lo
energy
prepare incluso
sector going
para
to
trabajar
hire
en la
these
NASA.
workers?
La NASA no lo va a contratar si está
I mean,
enfermo.
nobody will.
Y ese ha sido nuestro discurso. O sea, me parece que estamos
So I
perdiendo el
believe that
sentido
we are
de lo importante que es el ser
really
humano,
losing
lo
sight of just how
importante que es
important
el
human
trabajo.
beings are.
Transición justa es justicia. Son tres
It's about
columnas: justicia
justice.
social, justicia
We need social
económica
justice,
y justicia
economic
ambiental,
justice, and
abrazados
environmental
por el
justice.
trabajo decente.
They must all be
En Latinoamérica
included in the idea of
queremos hacer
decent
y
work.
copiar un proceso que ha costado en Europa, que son desarrollados, que
We have
tienen
developed
gran poder de
economies.
protección social, leyes laborales potentes,
There are great employment
tienen
laws in Europe where workers
negociaciones
enjoy
colectivas
protection
que
and
abarcan el
collective
90 y
negotiation
80%
power.
de la población laboral. Aquí no tenemos ni el 10% de eso.
Here, we don't even have
Entonces,
10% of what they
en
have in
cierta
Europe.
forma, y para no ser tan negativo, lo positivo es que la transición justa nos va a empujar, quizás, si
So
somos
this,
inteligentes en Latinoamérica,
well,
a
if we are
unirnos
intelligent in Latin America, this
el
will push
sueño
us to come together
de unirnos el Caribe y Latinoamérica,
in the
como siempre
Caribbean and Latin
quisimos, en un
America.
objetivo.
We
Es
have to
en
come
cómo
together
avanzamos, cómo juntamos
and
los
focus
medios
on one goal.
económicos y
We have to bring
tecnológicos
together the
para
necessary
tener una
economic
transición que
and
realmente sea
technological
justa.
means
Eso
to
es un
create a
poco
truly just energy transition.
Lorena, y como te digo,
So,
no quiero
Lorena,
redundar en mucho lo que dijo
I don't want
el
to go over
compañero Otto,
again
porque
what
mucho de lo que
Otto
él
already
piensa
said, because
se vive en las realidades de las
much of what he
comunidades. Acá en
said
Chile
is
tenemos,
also experienced
todavía
by
el
our
Estado
community
no
here
se
in
hace cargo
Chile.
ni las empresas de
And
niños
here,
con metales pesados en la sangre por este
for example,
mercado.
companies are still not
Aunque ha
responding
sido demostrado también, ¿no?
En el norte,
for the
Científicamente.
issue
exacto,
of
exacto.
children who
En
have heavy
Chile,
metals in their
en el
blood due to
centro donde
industrial
yo
activity,
vivo,
and
me
that was
refiero
proven in the
mucho
north.
acá,
Yes, it
ahí
was.
incluso hubo
Here,
una declaración de un tribunal constitucional de medio ambiente que todavía no se aplica sus correcciones. Las empresas ignoraron lo que dijo el Tribunal de Justicia Ambiental
and here we have to
anterior.
ensure just energy transition
Y en el
for
sur,
environmental
bueno, los niños los
justice.
intoxican en los colegios. Y en el sur tenemos niños
In
con
the
metales
south,
pesados. Entonces, yo
we
siempre
have these
digo
children with
que
heavy metals in their
hoy día
blood.
tenemos a la capitana mundial de medio ambiente, a la ministra
So we now
de
have
medio ambiente acá, en Chile.
a
O
minister
sea,
of
ahí eso
environment here
demuestra
in Chile.
que nuestro
Sí.
discurso de política e hipocresía
Is
es como
leading this
para afuera quiero
hypocritical
salvar el
political
planeta y en mi
discourse.
casa tengo un desastre. Entonces, en ese
Basically,
sentido, como
the
digo, y lo
discourse
malo
is we
son
want
los
to
hechos,
save the
realmente.
environment, but then you see
Hay
what's being
muchos
done here
elementos.
in
No,
Chile.
y no ve señales de
It's
Lorena,
completely
eso es lo
hypocritical.
lamentable, no ve señales
This is
de
not
que
a
el
sign of
empresariado, que
anything,
es el que tiene el poder,
Lorena.
por lo
It's
menos se
truly
ponga rojo una
despicable
vez y diga, bueno, voy a hacer bien las cosas a
to
partir de
see
ahora.
how
Sino que al
many
contrario,
or
su
how much power
ambición,
business people
sus
have
ganas de
here.
seguir ganando, además, ¿para qué
All they
hablar
want to do is
del
to
sistema de
continue making
protección
money.
social que
How
se establece
incredible
en
would
Chile,
it be
la
to see if
AFP,
they would
con
at
los
least
cuales
once
sacan la plata para hacer proyectos
be
empresariales?
honest
Las
and
plata
admit
de los
what
ahorros de
they
los
want or do
trabajadores
things
son
properly?
ocupadas por los grandes empresarios
And
para
so
hacer
here,
proyectos. Entonces, cuando uno tiene un sistema así,
when you have a system
realmente
like
más que
this,
salir a ser un ejemplo,
it's not about
deberíamos
being a
darnos
role model to
vergüenza,
follow. We should
ponernos
actually be
rojos y tratar de
ashamed.
cambiar,
We
tratar
should go red in the
de
face
ser
and actually
mejores,
try to
¿no?
change and
¿Para qué
try to
hablar
do
de la
better.
tercerización? Hasta el Estado. Murió un trabajador hace poco en La Moneda, en la casa del gobierno, un
And
gaffiter,
here,
murió por las condiciones laborales, en plena casa de
we
gobierno.
had a case
Entonces,
of a
cuando uno
public
ve todas
servant
estas
dying
condiciones,
who died due to
realmente,
poor employment
¿para qué decir si
conditions,
el
a very
Estado,
clear
si el
example
gobierno
of
se
what is
hace
happening.
cómplice del
And if the
abuso laboral,
government
qué le
here
podemos
is an
pedir
accomplice
al empresariado
in
privado?
employment
Así
abuse,
que,
well, what
por lo
can
menos,
we
pero con la
ask of
esperanza,
private
vuelvo a
business
repetir,
people? At
que
least here we
cuando
have the hope
los vientos son en contra, hay que buscar la manera para poder
that when
poner la
these winds
vela del
are
barco
against
a
us,
favor y avanzar.
we
Y
can
yo creo que en
hoist
ese
our sail
sentido
and
los
somehow
trabajadores de
use this to our
Latinoamérica y
advantage.
Caribe tenemos un
And in
desafío
the
que es
region, in Latin
tratar de
America and the
unirnos,
Caribbean,
tratar de
we do
unirnos.
have the challenge of trying to come
Claro.
together. Of
Alejandro,
course. Thank you
gracias
very much,
de
Alejandro.
esta intervención que tú
Thank
realizas.
you
Yo
for
retomo,
your presentation.
hombre, una de las reflexiones claves
One of
que
the
hemos
key
venido también
reflections that we
incluso
have
haciendo
also
internamente y que hoy gracias a
been
este espacio
doing
podemos también
internally,
compartir,
and now thanks
es
to
que
this
a
event we
veces
can also
sabemos el
share,
qué hay
is the
que
fact that
hacer.
we sometimes
Está
know
clarito en un
what we have to
documento
do.
tal
That's
cual,
clear
hay
in a
que hacer
document,
esto, pero
what we
cuando
have to
entramos a ver el
do.
cómo,
But when
en
we look at
cómo se
the
hacen las cosas,
how things are done,
también Allí empezamos a tener
that is where we start
limitaciones.
having a few
Entonces,
limitations.
a mí me
So
queda, y espero que también a quienes nos están
I hope
acompañando
that
en
those
este
who are here
espacio,
with us
muy presente cuando tú dices, es que no pueden
really
haber
understand the
diálogos
fact
de sordos.
when you say we
El
cannot have
diálogo
dialogues amongst
debe
deaf people.
convocar a la
Dialogue
construcción, al
has
trabajo
to
conjunto
lead to
precisamente.
construction, to a
Y eso
joint
parte también de
effort.
un valor
And
que
that
yo
also has to
resalto
do with something
y
that I
que
highlight
debe primar,
and
creo yo,
that has
y
to be
rescato incluso
important.
del
And I
sector
highlight
sindical
it
y del mundo
and
laboral,
I
es
take it
la
from the
solidaridad.
union and
Parece
work
básico
sectors, which is
y parece
solidarity. It
sencillo,
seems as something,
pero
it seems to be
partiendo de
basic
allí,
and simple.
lo que
But
se
starting
puede
from that,
lograr de allí en adelante
what can be achieved from then on
es importante
is
en este marco.
significant in this
Entonces,
framework.
sin duda alguna, el
So
cómo se
without a
hacen las
doubt,
cosas sí es
how we do
aterrizado
things
a las realidades
if
territoriales
is really
en
if it is
donde
really
nos
brought down to
encontramos
the
en donde
territorial
estamos
realities of
pretendiendo
where
tener
we are
proyectos
and where we're
enmarcados en
intending
una
to
transición
have
energética justa.
projects framed
También
in a
muy
fair and
aterrizados
just
al
transition,
contexto local,
also very much considering the local
al
context
arraigo que existe
and the
en los lugares,
rooting that
muy
exists in
aterrizado
these
a las
regions and
particularidades
the
laborales
particularities
de
of the
quienes
work
están también inmersos
of
allí.
those who are
Esto
also immersed
son elementos que valen
in
la
all.
pena.
These are
Entonces, desde
elements that
Chile,
are
con la
worth it to
experiencia, con los
consider.
hechos que tú nos
So
compartes
from
hoy,
Chile and the
Alejandro,
experience
sí,
that
hay
you are
muchas
sharing with
cosas
us
que
today,
cuestionar
Alejandro,
y
there are
entonces
many things that we have
se
to
convierte esto
question.
en un
So
proceso
this
también de
becomes a
aprendizaje,
process
de
of
aprendizaje
learning,
conjunto y para
learning
retomar
together,
elementos que
and
permitan a la hora de
to
implementar
take back
esos
elements that
diálogos,
allow
de
us
decir, bueno,
to
ya
say
aquí tenemos esta serie de
we have this
aspectos que
series
no
of
se nos pueden
aspects
escapar.
that we cannot
Y uno de
overlook.
esos aspectos también,
And
para
one
ya
of those
ir dándole la
aspects also
palabra a Marius.
Lorena,
to,
perdón,
Sí,
sorry, Lorena.
entre comillas, o sea, perdón, entre paréntesis, una cosa que se me
I'm
fue.
sorry. One
La
thing that I
relación
forgot
entre
is the
trabajadores
relationship between
y empresa
the
es de
workers
poder,
and the
¿no?
company. It's a
El
power
sindicato lo que
relationship.
busca es tener
The
poder
union
sobre una
wants to obtain
jerarquía. Las
power
empresas son
on a
entidades
hierarchy.
jerárquicas, no democráticas,
Companies
¿no?
are
Por lo tanto, lo que
hierarchy
trata de hacer el
entities, not
sindicato es
democratic ones. So
ponerle
what the
democracia a
union
esa
wants
jerarquía.
is to
El
add
tema está que hay un tercer
democracy to that
actor que es el
hierarchy.
gobierno, que
So
también
there's a
busca
third
poder,
actor, which is the
¿no?
government, that is also
Entonces, en ese
seeking
sentido,
power.
el tema de la
So in that
transición
sense,
justa
just
busca
transition
equilibrar esos
seeks to
poderes. El tema
balance out
está
that power.
que nuestras
The thing is that
ideologías
our
latinoamericanas
Latin American
han hecho que
ideologies
los empresarios
have
tengan el poder máximo
made
y ahí es donde se produce
businessmen
el problema
as the
del
maximum power
empresariado, porque la
holders, and that is
transición
where the
justa
problem
llama a tener
arises because
equilibrio
just transition calls for a
en
balance
en esta
in
compulsión del poder,
this
¿no? Y ahí el tema es básico,
fight
y yo lo
for
decía el
obtaining
otro día,
power.
si acá hay que
Like
conversar
I
las
said
cosas al pan
before,
pan y al vino vino, el tema es
we
poder.
have to
Nos van a
talk about
dar
things
los
clearly. It's a matter of
trabajadores
power.
que
Workers will
tenemos
get,
problemas de
those who
sindicalización,
have a
que
problem with
tenemos problemas de
unions
acceso a
and have
negociación
a
colectiva,
problem in terms of
poder
access to
para
collective
participar en esto.
negotiation, will we
Esa es la
have power
pregunta
to be able to
dejo,
participate in
que
this? That
siempre
is a
dejo
question that
planteada. No
I
tuve
always
respuesta hasta
share.
ahora,
There
pero
isn't a
bueno,
question, an
espero que de a
answer
poco
that has been
vayamos
given to me
teniendo la
so far, but I
respuesta y
hope
nos vayan
that soon
dando el lugar.
we
Así
will
que eso
be
quería
obtaining
decirlo
an
antes
answer. So
de
this is what I
continuar.
wanted to mention before
tranquilo, que si no
continuing. I'm
tenemos las
sorry.
respuestas, pues nos vamos inspirando para seguir
So
adelantando
this is an
procesos también
inspiration to be able
que
to
nos ayuden
continue
a
moving on
desenredar este
with
problema, como
processes
tú lo
that can
mencionas,
help us
de algún modo
resolve
desde
this
nuestros
issue
particulares roles en
from
la
our
sociedad
own specific
en donde
roles
convivimos.
in the
Entonces, gracias
societies
también
in which
por esa
we
aclaración
live. So
y
thank you
bueno,
for
para
that
no soltar
clarification.
la idea que venía también
And
entre las manos
before
para darle ahora la palabra a
letting go
Marius.
of the idea that I was trying to communicate before handing it
Importante
over to
también el
Marius,
cuidado.
care is
El
also
cuidado
important.
y también cómo logramos entonces en todo esto
Care and
transversalizar de
how we
algún
can
modo
also
una
make
perspectiva
this
de
cross-cutting
género
a perspective, a gender
que sea
perspective that is
además
cross-cutting,
inclusiva también
that is also
y que
inclusive,
retome precisamente
and that
los
can
aprendizajes.
really go back to
Entonces,
those
Marius,
learning experiences.
adelante
So
también
Marius,
para que nos compartas un
go
poco
ahead,
sobre
please,
las
and share with us
investigaciones que se han
the
desarrollado desde
research that has
perspective,
been carried out
también desde tu
fossil exit and
experiencia
in your
como
experience
investigador
as
en todo
a
esto y que termina
researcher in
también
all this,
convirtiéndose
and that
en un
also ends
factor
up being
dinamizador,
a
en un
dynamizing
elemento que
factor,
vale la pena
an
tener en
element that
cuenta a la
is
hora
worth
de decir
considering
como, bueno,
when
vamos a
saying,
tener
okay,
como
we're going to have
escenarios de diálogo social,
social dialogue
entonces esto
scenarios, and
tampoco se puede quedar por fuera.
this cannot be left out.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Lorena, and also thank you, Otto and Alejandro. It was very interesting to hear your perspective. And I will start a presentation just now, and will share my screen with you. Moment. So I hope you all can see that. All right. So yes, from this perspectives of workers, which has been very interesting to hear about. I will shift the focus a bit towards the perspective of care, or especially like when we were starting out with our research in Eastern Germany in the core region of Lusatia. We were focused on the idea to get in the perspective of local women. So my fellow researchers, Paula Walk and Isabel Braunga, they have before studied the role of women in past coal transitions around the world, but there's especially a lot of literature about like the coal transition in England, in the UK, but also in America. So they were inspired to focus on the German side, and that's where I came in and joined their research project. And I will explain a little bit about the basic situation in Germany. So we have like a long tradition of like coal mining in Germany, especially hard coal was very important. Hard coal is mostly found in the western part of Germany, but we nowadays see more lignite mining, which has been very influential in the last 50 years. But then with the restructuring after the reunification, so basically the socialist dictatorship in Eastern Germany collapsed, and the wall fell basically in 1990, and this is also where lignite mining in Eastern Germany went like abruptly, had like a huge change, like a restructuring. And of course today we have like totally like another restructuring again with this coal phase out, which is inspired by trying to mitigate climate change. So this is more like the recent 20 years. And we were thinking about going into Lusatia because it's a very interesting part of Germany, very rural, although it's very close to Berlin. It is very much like, the region is called the coal region, so there's a lot of coal mining, and the regional economy is very much like dependent on coal. But this is changing, and we were asking ourselves what local women think about this transition process. And here you can see one of the mines, and these are huge open cast lignite mines, and these landscapes, they reach like if you are in one of the mines, or like on the brink of the mine, of the pit, there's like just like a vast moon landscape, which is quite impressive, but also a bit scary, I must say. And on the right side, you see kind of like the aftermath of these mines. There are huge lakes created, by water flowing into these former pits, but also groundwater coming up from where before water was pumped out. And this is actually a huge problem as well. Like pumping out the water changed the whole kind of water system in this region. And these lakes, although they might look nice, they are actually kind of dead. Like there's not much living inside because they're very acidic. So there are minerals like being washed out from the very deep layers. So we were thinking about going into Lusatia and basically adopting this kind of perspective of care. So how to be careful of how to transition. And I really like this, and Lorena, you brought it up, like this how to question, right? Like how to exactly do it, how to be practical about it. And local women, we found, were very practical about solutions for just transition. Just to give you a little bit more perspective, on the right side, you see like this kind of stone, like it's supposed to be like a coal brick, and there's like written on it the flame of socialism. So in the eastern part of Germany, the GDR, the German Democratic Republic, the former like socialist dictatorship, lignite mining used to be a huge part of the energy production, and actually there was a lot of pride in like the region, but also like the whole nation was dependent on this energy, and there was a large number of jobs in the lignite industry. Was very important, like economic factor for the regional economy, but also for the whole like influx of people into the region. But this changed abruptly in the 1990s after the fall of the wall. There was basically a huge like downfall of a lot of industry in the region, and many people went unemployed. So here you can see what area I'm talking about. So it's very much in the right corner, like this red dot that you see on the map. And basically, the unemployment rate used to be very high, like beginning in the 90s, but going also into the 2000s with about like 20%. Then a lot of people actually left the region because there was no job, there was no future. We talked with a lot of people that like older people that told their children, leave this region, there's no future here. And still like and you can see like how the lignite production went down, and also the number of jobs went down between like 1990 and 2020. On the right side, you can see like in blue, there's the numbers from 1990, and in light blue or greenish, there's the numbers from 2020. So you see there's like a huge structural change or transition, but it hasn't been a just one, right? So now is the question, like with this kind of like new transition, because of climate change, because of like CO2 emission goals, will this be this time a just one? Because there's so much like conflict still, like so much like hardship still from this time of this abrupt change. So basically, we have a lot of challenges in this region. There is the challenge of the demographic change. So there's a lot of old people left in the region. So young people left, but old people were left behind, especially young women were leaving the region because they didn't, they didn't see the future for themselves in the region. then there's this huge challenge which my co-speakers mentioned before, that there were well-paid jobs before in the energy and the coal energy industry, and now they should be replaced with other well-paid jobs, but this is hard to do. And actually, I think there's an important difference between like Germany and Chile and Colombia. I think comparatively, the unions are very strong, especially the coal unions are very strong and powerful in Germany, and they were able to influence the process of coal phase out a lot. So we'll go into this in the next slide. Actually, there's now a problem. There's more jobs than people, so there's a lack of skilled workers in the region. Another huge problem is these people who kind of like are still in the region, who are like left with all these old conflicts, feeling left behind, maybe. All of these problems mounting up to a switch towards the political right. So there's a lot of racist politics now, a lot of right-wing politics now being part of the local development, and this is a huge problem, and this is also connected to the coal phase out. And of course, we have, like I mentioned it before, like this huge environmental legacies of mining, especially like this huge pit holes in the ground, these wounds in the ground, but as well the social wounds, right? So these are also connected. Villages were eradicated, people were displaced. There's old conflicts about this, and these old wounds in like the social network like connect to this wounds in the ecology and the ecological networks, right? So I will shortly introduce you to the process of coal phase out in Germany to just give you an overview. So as I mentioned before, the unions in Germany are quite influential. So there was a process of phase out. The process of phase out was started actually with a coal commission. So there was like many politicians, like local politicians, then the unions and also some environmental groups, part of like a process of negotiation, how to conduct a just phase out of coal. And basically the result of this process was the federal law on coal phase out, which meant that there's a lot of money flowing into the region who were like formerly dependent or still dependent on coal and coal mining. So there's actually 40 billion euros in total. And so this means that in Lusatia was a very small part of Germany, very like not very densely populated. There's 40 billion euros, a 6.2 billion flowing into Lusatia. So for this very small part of Germany, it's a lot of money, it's huge opportunity. But the question is, now that we have a lot of money, how can we like deal with this in a just way? Like how can we like see like a just process of like distributing this money, right? And this was our question going into the research process, and we are looking for like answers into in this like founding guidelines. So basically, the guidelines how to spend the money. There's like policy documents that like elaborate how to do it, what's important and what's not. And we were looking through these documents with this kind of perspective of care, like of care work, of like basically also a perspective like, is there something else other than like industrial jobs developed with these founding guidelines? And we used some feminist theory in order to be able to like see the patterns of care in our data, and especially we used like this kind of concept of caring democracy. So basically there's two parts, like care work, care meaning like the direct care for people, so children, but also elderly people, healthcare, but as well like providing basic requirements for the human body, so like electricity, warmth, sanitation, basically. So this is part of like our perspective on care, and combining this like caring perspective with this perspective to democracy. And there's also a very interesting notion coming from the US, actually, like this notion of like feminist energy systems. So being able actually to combine like this gender perspective with like a class perspective, so workers' perspective, and also like a perspective on race. So trying to combine all of these perspectives into one perspective where we can, or this is like their concept of the just transition, basically. And going further, I will show you some pictures of like some of the meetings we went to. So this is basically local women meeting up, we talking to them, interviewing them, and basically there was like a whole process of women like basically in the beginning only like talking to each other, meeting up, having like conversations about like what they need, what they want in life, like in from politics. But this growing and growing into like a whole network of people, and very influential in this network were like local gender equality officers. So basically the local administrations in the cities and cities and municipalities, they have these administrations, they have usually one gender equality officers, and they are paid to basically look on public policy and see if it's gender equal. And these women like they connected each other into a network, and this has been quite like successful in building power. So basically this care work of like coming together, talking to each other, building relationship has led to them being able to be actually quite influential in the policy process of the transition. And I will give you some examples of their demands. So basically, first of all, most important, the participation of women in the decision processes, because this is not the case, for example, in one of the most important gremiums, meetings in a body in Saxony, there's only one woman out of 13 members. So this is the body where decision get made, how the money gets spent. So there's a lot of money, but no women involved in the decision making on how to spend the money. So basically transparency about the democratic process and like involvement of civil society. Then there's a lot of focus, as I mentioned before, on replacing coal jobs, because the union are very strong in this process and they have a lot of influence. But other sectors like the care sector, cultural sector, education sector, they receive little attention. So we have this kind of problem. There's a lot of money flowing into like building stuff, but some of this, like houses, harbors, like these lakes, former lakes that get restructured, they are empty because there's nobody there using this. So this is like there's a lot of money, but it gets spent on projects that are not helping anybody. So this is a demand of local women to change that and to give more money into community work, into healthcare jobs, into basically caring professions. So another point is that the coal industry is an important identity anchor and is still very like influential in the thinking of people. And there needs to be like a careful kind of way of dealing with this cultural part of coal mining, right? So basically what we arrived at was at this like 4 pillars of care as social infrastructure of coal region in transition. So basically this care work, we think about it as something that builds this network, like this basic network of human connection, and this is lacking actually in Lusatia, in the eastern part of Germany, because there's so many old conflicts. Now right-wing parties coming into picture, so people don't talk to each other, and this is like we sometimes don't realize, but people having a basic human network is the basis of everything. Nothing works, the economy doesn't work if people don't talk to each other. And this is why we call it like social infrastructure, right? The basic like underneath structure of society. So one of the most important aspects is social cohesion. So building and investing into like social networks. Then another important point, as I mentioned before, is like caring for the social and ecological damages that have been done by coal mining. So connecting these kind of like two seemingly separate like areas. Another point is like basically providing good services to people. So like improving like public transport, improving like building good like networks for water distribution. So water scarcity is a problem. Internet connection, all these things. Healthcare is a huge problem. So this is basically their demand to invest into basic infrastructure. And of course, if you're gonna invest into basic infrastructure, the process of doing so has to be transparent, has to be democratic, and this is like the 4th pillar, democratic decisions on how to care. And yes, I'm thinking a bit over the time already, so I will stop there, and thank you very much.
Gracias, Marius.
Thank you very much, Marius, for such a complete presentation. We have learned a great deal, and I have taken many notes. Let me just mention a few things. This work on care and how it can be included is very important, especially looking at how it can be included across the board in this just energy transition. Because here, we need to take all of these different actors into account when it comes to our dialogue, when it comes to a just energy transition. So it's very, very important to take all of these different societal sectors into account. We've talked quite a lot, I think, so I would like to give an opportunity to other participants who are joining us to add their comments or comments or questions. Please just raise your hand or put your questions in the chat. And we'd be happy to give you the floor.
al momento de cierre.
And we are getting close to the end of our session. I know we have lots of ideas that come up all the time.
Conversando por mucho tiempo más a la final, pero bueno, hay
we would, of course, like to have more
limitaciones.
time to converse, but of course,
Entonces, no veo por aquí, pero creo que Grace
we have to have some
tiene
kind
algo que
of
comentar. Grace.
restrictions on the time that we
Lore,
take.
muchas gracias.
Lorena, thank you very much.
Marius, thank you so much for this presentation. It's very insightful. A otro Alejandro.
And thank you, Alejandro.
No veo preguntas en el chat, pero a mí sí
I
me
don't
surge
see any
algo
questions
como
in the chat.
investigadora viniendo de Colombia y
I
estamos
am a
observando,
researcher.
digamos que
I'm
casi
from
siempre
Colombia, but I'm in
tendemos
Germany.
a
And what I
mirar y a
think is
comparar
that
con
we
los casos de
have a
transiciones en
tendency
el norte global, como
to
queriendo
look
copiar y
at
pegar en
cases of
realidad.
energy
Pero
transition in the
resulta
global
que
north. It's
no
almost as if we want to
hay
copy paste them.
como ese
But
how to o esa forma
we
de
lack that
hacerlo
how
que
to
aplique a todos los contextos, porque hay que
that
tener en
could apply to
cuenta
all contexts
cada contexto local para poder hacer estos procesos de transición.
to
Y
make sure that we
Marius
can have just
también lo comentaba allí.
energy transition.
Y los retos son muy diferentes. Entonces, en el
And
caso
there
de
are very
Alemania,
different
digamos que hay
challenges,
muchos
as Marius
recursos para
mentioned.
poder hacer las
In the case of
transiciones,
Germany, there are
pero
many
todavía
economic
no
resources,
se tiene claro cómo hacerlo.
but there's no clarity on
Nosotros
how to do
en
it.
nuestros contextos
But
estamos
in our
iniciando
context,
como todos
perhaps
estos
in Latin
procesos de diálogo y
America,
de
we are
participación.
getting started with these dialogue and participation
Todavía no
processes,
tenemos los recursos.
but
Alejandro
we
lo
lack
mencionaba, que tenemos
resources.
transición sin recursos financieros.
So we're
Pero
trying to
¿cuáles son
do
como
this
esos elementos
without
que
financial resources?
efectivamente sí podríamos tomar como aprendizaje de
But what
qué
could we
hacer
take as
y
lessons
qué no
learned?
hacer
What should be done
de
and
lo
what
que
should be
ya se
avoided?
haya transitado en otros lugares y que
When we
pudiéramos
look at the
aplicar en el
experience
caso
in
de
other
Chile
areas and might
y en
be
el caso
applied
de
in the case of
Colombia. No
Chile,
sé si
Colombia.
quisiera tomar la palabra, si Alejandro, si Otto, para
So I don't know
contestar
if
esta pregunta.
Alejandro or Otto would be available to
Bueno,
respond.
¿cómo estás, Grace?
How are you, Grace?
Muy bien, señor Otto.
El caso, unas notas de Alejandro, por lo menos eso
So,
de que hay un conversatorio de sordos.
like I said, it's like a
Son
conversation
sordos para
amongst
escuchar a
deaf
los
people.
trabajadores aquí en Colombia.
Really,
Pero
everyone
también
is
hay
deaf when
una
it comes to listening
dificultad
to workers here in
tremenda entre las
Colombia
pretensiones del gobierno actual y
But when it comes
los
to the current
empresarios,
government,
sus entidades y sus gremios.
when it comes to the different
Una
entities and the
discusión
different union groups,
que es netamente económica y política. ¿Qué conviene más?
what
¿Arrancar la
is most
transición
convenient here?
ya
Should we start the transition now?
con proyectos de energía limpia, que su generación no es
When it comes to
muy
clean
alta?
energy, well,
Los
we don't have a
proyectos en La
lot being
Guajira
created right
decían
now.
que
For
para
example, in
este
La
año
Guajira was scheduled
cercano
for this year,
al 2025,
or
esos
to be
proyectos
completed
deberían
in
estar aportando
2025.
6.000 megas
The idea is for this to be
básicamente
providing
al
6,000
Estado Nacional, y
megawatts
eso
that should be
no está.
connected to the national grid, but that's not
Pero hay
happened.
proyectos
It was
particulares,
slated to pass
sobre
this
todo
year.
fotovoltaicos en la costa,
When it
que
comes to
ya van
photovoltaic
aportando
energy on the
un
coast,
porcentaje mediano al sistema interconectado. Pero los gremios
but the
que
union
manejan
groups
el sector de generación, transmisión,
that are
distribución
in
y
charge of
comercialización
generation,
en Colombia
transmission,
van por
distribution,
un
and
camino
commercialization in
y
Colombia are
este
heading down
gobierno,
one
los
path,
proyectos de este gobierno
and
de
the
la
current
transición del
government
cero
is
carbón,
focused on
etcétera, etcétera,
a
van por
zero
otro camino.
carbon policy, which is a different pathway.
Pero sin embargo, nosotros que siempre estamos como averiguando
But we are always
investigando y leyendo,
looking into and
hay
reading
un gran
about
consenso de los
everything that is
estudiosos del
happening.
sector minero energético en Colombia
And there is great
que
consensus
no
in
ven próximo
the mining sector here in
que se
Colombia. And
cierren, que se
basically, in that
paren las
sector,
térmicas y
they
que
do
haya
not
cero carbón.
believe that we will get to
En
zero
esta
carbon and be shutting
coyuntura
down all of
que
our
estamos
thermal energy
pasando desde
plants in the
marzo,
near
abril,
future. And
de
so
la,
in March of
de
April of
la,
this year,
del problema de las hidros
we had issues with
con la
hydroelectricity
deficiencia de agua para su
because there was
generación,
insufficient
están
water
dando
for
la razón.
hydroelectricity to be used. And we are seeing here that the thermal energy plants actually sustained us then. So perhaps in that sense, the mining sector is right. But Fendi Petrol, the Andy, which is the Colombian business people's group, all of these groups that are headed up by important business people in this country do not believe that the energy transition is close in Colombia. And they will do anything they can to come up with a new clean energy transition. And we as workers are stuck in the middle, waiting to see what will happen to us. But the truth is that for now, at least, thermal energy plants have been sustaining our system. They have maintained our energy generation. And so this makes it seem as though these business people are right and their interests will be served. We have political interests, we have business interests, and we have economic interests behind all of this. So today, we've made very few advances when it comes to advances. As workers, we have attained very little. We have not been appropriately safeguarded. It is not clear what role we will play in this new energy transition. That's Colombia's current situation. In the most read newspapers in the country, on the news, on television, also in the ideas shared by the former economy and mining minister, they talk about the energy transition and they say that it is not time for coal to leave the scene. But they make no reference to the social issues or workers' issues.
Gracias, señor Otto.
Thank you.
Señor Otto. Quisiera también darle la palabra a Alejandro o a Marius frente a la
I'd like to
misma
hand over
pregunta
to
que
Alejandro or
entonces,
Marius,
no
perhaps
sé
to
con eso
respond
qué
to
más
that
agregar algo
original
allí.
question that was asked by Grace. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Sí, mira, agradecer a Grace la pregunta.
I would like to thank Grace for her
Yo creo que
question.
Marius dio, nosotros hicimos
Marius,
un informe con respecto al tema, te lo entregué yo, Lorena, si quiere lo puede compartir
we
con los
have a report
participantes, no
on
hay ningún
this.
problema.
I
Y
can
le
share this
agradezco
with you. There's
porque
no issue there.
Marius en su presentación
Marius, thank you for
afirma lo
your
que nosotros
presentation
habíamos visto
because
de Alemania.
you affirmed what we had already
Fundamentalmente
identified in Colombia,
los sindicatos de carbón, los sindicatos
that the
de la
coal
metalurgia
unions
son
and the
sindicatos poderosos
metallurgical unions are
en
very, very
Europa, lo
powerful
está
groups
pasando
in Europe.
a Inglaterra, ¿no es
We see this
cierto?
happening in
Entonces, de
the
cierta
UK.
forma, hay una oposición por un tema cultural y porque los seres humanos somos animales de costumbre, ¿no?
I mean, as
Y
human beings, we are
lamentablemente hay mucho temor a los
animals of
cambios.
habit, creatures of habit,
Entonces, en
rather,
ese
and
sentido,
changes
hay un
take a
tema
long
cultural
time.
fuerte, pero me parece que lo fundamental de todo es lo
But I
que
believe what is
Marius
fundamental
dice de
here
su
is what Marius
presentación.
said in his
El problema de ello es
presentation.
mucho recurso
The
sin
issue in
saber cómo
Germany
lo bajan
is
para que sea
a lot of
democráticamente
money, but not
distribuido.
knowing how to
El problema
democratically
nuestro
distribute it.
es
But in
no
our
tener
case,
recursos.
the problem is we don't have
Entonces,
those
lo
resources. We don't have
básico, y lo
money.
hemos dicho, la transición justa empezó en
So
Estados Unidos con muchos recursos
the
en el sector
just
petrolero.
energy transition started in the USA
Sindicatos petroleros dijeron, bueno,
with a
aquí nosotros
dearth
vamos a pagar los platos
of,
rotos porque se han
or rather with an excess of
endurecido las
resources.
normativas
But we have seen
ecológicas,
how
por lo
ecological
tanto,
regulations
medioambientales.
have
Por lo
been
tanto,
made
bueno,
stricter.
acá hay recursos,
Here
que estos recursos nos paguen. ¿Qué se le dio? Un sistema, y quiero contestar
we
una
have,
pregunta que
I'd
sale
like
ahí
to
en el chat
respond to a question
con
that's in the
respecto al
chat,
tema de qué idea tenemos nosotros. Bueno, la
which
idea es
says, well,
cambiar
what
el
is
plan
our
laboral,
idea as
primero.
workers?
El plan laboral no puede ser Chile, no puede tener Chile un plan laboral de los años 80 en donde el
We
autoempleo
have
no está regulado.
a
Por lo
labor
tanto, termina
legislation
siendo
in
trabajo
Chile
informal.
from the 80s that
Y el
doesn't
trabajo informal
have
es sin
any
protección social.
reference made to freelancers,
Por lo
independent
tanto, para cuando
workers.
nosotros hablamos de autoempleo o de
So
emprendimiento,
when we talk
que
about
normalmente en Chile se
startups
mezcla
or
las pymes en Chile, es
freelancers,
lo mismo
which
la
also
señora que
crosses over with
trabaja,
SMEs,
que es dueña de un
here in
kiosco, que es un emprendimiento
Chile,
familiar, que una
it's the
empresa
same
que
to
genera
talk about,
100
someone who
millones
has a little stand
de
on
pesos
a
en
street
facturación,
corner or a
millones
small
de pesos al
business.
año.
They're treated the same way as someone who
Entonces
bills
hay un
10 million
problema
Chilean
también
pesos a year.
de cómo se
So we have a
estructura
huge
las
issue
pymes, ¿no?
with
Y
how we
ahí en donde yo
categorize
le pierdo la
SMEs.
ayuda al que realmente lo necesita, al emprendedor.
Here,
Por lo tanto, ¿qué es lo que está pasando hoy día? Los trabajadores subcontratados,
what is
como viven
happening
el mes a mes,
is
¿no? O sea,
that
ellos cobran
workers
y
who are
pagan sus deudas, quedan
subcontracted,
sin
they
plata
live
y si
month
no
to
tienen
month.
trabajo,
They
quedan
send their
indefensos.
invoices on a monthly
Por lo
basis, and if
tanto,
for some
¿qué es
reason
lo
they're
que hay
not
que
able
crear? Un
to
sistema de
work, they're
protección
left completely
social más
exposed. So we
robusto,
need a more robust social protection system.
con temas de cesantía más
We need
potentes.
to also
Entonces, en el
have
fondo,
a
que el
stronger
trabajador
severance
sienta que hay un
system
apoyo, pero si no, ¿qué es lo que está
so that
pasando? Que el
workers
trabajador
can really
recibe
feel
4 o
supported.
5 millones de pesos chilenos, que son
But
más o
here,
menos 4.000,
if we're
5.000
talking about
dólares,
workers
recibe
who are
esa
being paid
plata, lo
some
usa ¿de qué? Para comprarse
$4,005
un
a
objeto y
month,
termina trabajando en Uber sin protección social. Todavía acá se está
well, they put that money,
trabajando
let's say,
en la protección
towards
de los,
paying for a
de los
car because
Uber.
they need that to work, and then
Entonces, que no son
they work
considerados trabajadores, ojo,
in
son
Uber, but they
considerados
are not
que prestan
considered
servicio. Entonces, en
employees.
ese
They are
sentido,
simply
nosotros estamos
providing
en
a
contra de
service.
ese sistema de que está
And so we are
potenciando el
against
trabajo
this
informal.
system,
Y
which
lo que
is
queremos es, la idea nuestra es, bueno,
boosting
armemos
informality.
un plan,
So what
sentémonos
our idea
gobierno, trabajadores
is
y
that
empresarios y
government
creemos
and
un plan
workers
moderno
need to sit
laboral,
down together and come up
un
with a
plan para el
modern
siglo
labor
XXI, que
plan,
no un plan de los
a
80
21st century
que se
plan, not
impuso con la
rely on this
dictadura y que no
legislation
deja que los
that was
trabajadores se
created in the 1980s
sindicalicen
under a
más
dictatorship.
allá de lo que son las empresas y los sindicatos interempresas en Chile no pueden negociar
Here,
colectivamente a menos que la empresa
there
se
is no
estén de acuerdo.
ability for a union to
¿Y
collectively
quién
negotiate
va a
unless
estar
all
de
of the
acuerdo
companies agree.
si
And what
no
company
se
is
le
going to agree
presiona?
to that
La
if they're not
negociación
pressured
colectiva
to
acá
do so?
sí es un
Because collective
tema que no,
negotiation
en la cultura del empresario chileno no gusta. Hay un
is something
8% de
that
trabajadores
is
del mundo
rejected
laboral
by business
chileno
people here.
regular que tiene acceso a la negociación colectiva, de un
There is
22% de sindicalización.
22% of
Entonces,
all union
vuelvo a
members
reiterar,
are
me
able to
parece
access
que
this group,
a
the
nosotros
collective
en
negotiation
Latinoamérica nos
mechanism.
faltan
In Latin America,
muchas normativas
we
que
really lack
ayuden a la transición justa,
regulations
¿no? Como
to help with
protección
a
social,
just transition.
por ejemplo, participación ciudadana vinculante,
For example,
y lo otro, la
binding citizen
remediación. ¿Qué
participation or
remediación
remediation.
presentan las
What's
empresas, las
remediation?
termoeléctricas, en los lugares que han
What
afectado
remediation
tanto a los
is
trabajadores como a las
offered
comunidades, como les
by
contaba? ¿Quién se
companies
hace cargo de las
for communities
enfermedades de
and
las
individuals who
comunidades
have been
que rodeaban
impacted
que
by
rodean
industrial
los
activity
termoeléctricos?
who have become
O sea,
sick,
en
for
Chile
example.
ustedes vienen a los parques industriales y
Here,
están instalados
you go
tremendos
to an
parques
industrial
industriales
park
al lado de la costa en
and
poblaciones que son las más
these are
pobres,
built
que
right
son
on
las
the
que
coast next
tienen
to the poorest communities
mayoría de edad, dificultades de salud,
who are
hospitales precarios.
already elderly.
Entonces,
They
en el
lack
fondo uno
access to
dice,
healthcare
cuando
and
sería todo lo
hospitals.
contrario, cuando hay una instalación industrial tan grande, uno diría,
And
bueno, hay una
you would
riqueza que
say,
se distribuye
okay,
en las
look, but if there's so much
comunidades,
industrial
pero no
activity
es
here, that
así.
wealth should be
Por lo
reflected in local
tanto,
communities, but that
la
is not the
respuesta
case.
quizás
And
a la
so
persona que pregunta
perhaps
ahí
the answer to the
es,
question in the chat here,
Sandra Aranza, parece, Aranza,
Aranza, who asked the
me
question,
pregunta, yo
Aranza,
la respuesta es
my answer for her
potenciar
is
la protección
we have
social.
to boost
No
social
dejar a los
protection
trabajadores con una mano adelante y la otra atrás,
and
simplemente
not,
entregándole un bono de cierta cantidad de plata, casi comprando su salud, porque al fin y al cabo
employers
después lo único
bereft of
que
options
heredamos
who get paid a
los
bonus,
trabajadores en este sector a nuestros hijos
to
es
pay them off
pobreza,
because they don't have
es
health
deuda
services.
y
All
al
this leads to
final
is
una
poverty,
vida que no es digna.
debts,
Entonces, y
and
terminan
undignified
potenciando
life.
que el trabajo
And
informal quede
this
donde se
also
expande la
leads to more
precariedad,
informal work,
el
where
trabajo
we have even more
forzoso y la trata
precarious
de personas.
conditions,
Por
forced
lo
labor, and
tanto,
human
en ese
trafficking.
sentido,
And so, in
me
this
parece que
sense,
es fundamental
I believe
avanzar
that
no
it is
solamente en el tema de la
fundamental to
transición,
advance, not
sino
only with
también en
regards to the just
empoderar la
energy
protección
transition, but
social,
also
en crear bases
in
políticas públicas de
empowering more social
protección social
protection and laying the
justas que
foundations
hace
of just
Dato
social
lo
protection,
demanda Chile y
which
varios de los
has
países de
been
Latinoamérica.
demanded by Chile and many Latin
Que a
American
la final
countries for some
terminamos
time now.
hermanados precisamente también por este tipo de elementos,
We're also
Alejandro, en
tied by this kind
Latinoamérica.
of
Entonces, qué
element in
bueno que hoy
Latin
los tenemos
America,
aquí
so it's great that we're here
reflexionando. Bueno,
reflecting on
Marius,
this.
brevemente,
Marius, just very
algo
briefly,
corto tal vez que quieras agregar, porque
something
ya
brief that you
debemos
might want to
también
add
ir
because we have
cerrando
to
el
start
espacio.
wrapping up our event.
Yes, I was just thinking about like what we might be able to learn from this local women's organization that's like in order to build power to actually be able to like force our demands into public policy, we need to like build these networks, right? And basically what we're doing now, right? Like speak with each other, having this dialogue, connecting into like broader networks where we also, and this is what you were talking about, Lorena, like have some solidarity between different groups of in the society, and then we can like, and this is the example in Lusatia and in Eastern Germany, actually be able to have enough power to influence public policy and be heard. Yeah, I think it's very inspiring what you were talking about, and thank you very much. It was a very brilliant dialogue with you.
Gracias a ti también, Marius, por
Thank
acompañarnos.
you
Y
as
bueno,
well,
también
Marius, for
ha
being here
sido
with
un
us. And
gusto
for me, it
estar
has
con
been
todos
a
y con
pleasure
todas
to be
en este diálogo.
with all of you during
También,
this
como
dialogue.
siempre, pues un placer
And as
acompañar este
always,
tipo de
it is a
espacios
pleasure to be able to
desde la
support this
moderación,
kind
pero
of
también la
space as a
reflexión
moderator,
y para
but
ir
also
precisamente
from the reflection
revisando
point of
y
view, to be
viendo
able to
de qué manera le
analyze and
damos
see
continuidad a una
how we
transición
can
energética
give
justa y qué
continuity
mejor
to a
manera que
fair energy
acompañar de
transition. And what
trayectos,
better way
por supuesto,
than
para
to
POLEN.
support
Es
Tragics also to
un
be
gusto
able
ser
to,
parte de la red
and it's
de
a pleasure to
Trayects.
be able to
Para
be
mí ser becaria de
part of
Trayects
the
y también felicitar
Tragics
al
network,
Instituto de Estudios
and also
Ambientales en
to
sus
request
35 años en el marco
to
de su
congratulate
ingreso, que
the
también
environmental
pues,
study for
se
this
suman.
35 years
Aquí
within this
convergemos
framework.
varias fuerzas
And we all come together,
con el fin
several
de sacar
forces,
adelante este
with
tipo de
the
espacios.
purpose of
Gracias a todas las personas que nos
bringing together
estuvieron
all these
acompañando,
spaces.
al
Thank you
equipo técnico
to everyone
también,
who was
la
here with us, the
logística,
technical team as well,
al equipo de
logistics,
Alemania. Y
the
bueno,
team
me
in
despido por
Germany,
ahora. Grace, no sé
and
si quieras también agregar algo
this
para
is the end
finalizar.
from
Sí,
me
claro.
for now.
Muchas
Grace, would you like to
gracias,
add
Lore,
anything
por
else?
tu moderación,
Thank
como
you,
siempre, muy
Laura,
buena
as
en
well,
la
for
actividad.
your
Gracias también a
moderation during
Marius,
this activity. Thank you, Marius,
Alejandro,
as well,
Otto, por compartir
Alejandro,
todas estas
Otto,
experiencias y el
for
trabajo
sharing
que
all
han
this
realizado desde sus
experiences of the
diferentes
work that you've done
contextos.
from the
Yo desde
different
Trayects quiero darle
contexts.
las gracias a
From
todas y a
Tragics, I would
todos los
also like to
que
thank each and every
participaron hasta
one
el
of you
final de
who
este diálogo
participated until the end of this
y
dialogue,
también a todos los que han participado en la
and
serie
all
de
those who
diálogos
have
que hemos
participated in
tenido
the
hasta ahora.
series of
Recordemos
dialogues that we
que
have
el
had so
último
far.
diálogo del año lo
Please
vamos a
remember that
tener
the last
la
dialogue
próxima
this
semana,
year
el
will be
martes
held
19 de
next week
noviembre,
on Tuesday
con un
19th
diálogo organizado desde nuestro hub en
with
Sudáfrica,
a dialogue
titulado
organized from our hub in
Explorando el
South Africa
acceso
called
y
Exploring
Accesibilidad de
Access
la
and
Electricidad en
Accessibility
tiempos
of
de transiciones
Electricity in
energéticas.
Times of Energy
Estos
Transitions.
eventos, recuerden además que
These
los
events
encuentran en
are
nuestro
also
canal de YouTube.
found
También los
on our
invitamos a
YouTube
seguirnos
channel. And
en
we also
nuestras
invite
redes
you to
sociales,
follow
en
us on our
LinkedIn y en
social
X.
media, LinkedIn and
Muchas gracias de
X.
nuevo a todos los
Thank you
panelistas
very
por
much
haber
once again to
participado el
all
día de
of our
hoy,
panelists for
por
having
compartir
been
su
here with
valioso
us today,
conocimiento
for
y
sharing your
también
valuable
finalmente a
knowledge,
Interpreting por
and
haber
to
hecho
Interpreting
la
Colombia
traducción del
for
evento.
having
Feliz,
facilitated through the
feliz día,
interpretation
feliz tarde,
services.
feliz noche
Good
para
morning,
todas
good
y todos
afternoon, and good
y
evening
hasta
for
el próximo
everyone.
encuentro.